Hello.
I am Lauren.
I am Ken.
And this is Paradise After Dark.
Dark.
Paradise After Dark is an independent podcast covering true crime,
unsolved mysteries,
missing people,
and every now and then an urban legend.
If you'd like to support our show and get a bunch of extra content, please sign up for our Patreon at patreon.com/Palmahawk Media. That's PALMAHAWK Media.
And please be sure to check out our website at paradiseafterdark.com.
On the website, you'll find links to all of our episodes, even the archived episodes, our mailing list, merch store, links to all of our social medias, and of course, our Patreon.
We have a tip jar there, so if you want to help out the show, you can go visit our virtual tip jar and leave us a tip, and we'll give you a shout out on the show.
So, hi everyone. This is Lauren with Paradise After Dark, and I am here with Bill Kimberlin. Bill is You are a forensic psychologist?
No, so my doctorate's in psychology. I was geared more towards clinical psychology, spent about 12 years in academia, but the research and writing that I do is more along the lines of forensics. So, but my doctorate's in psychology.
Okay, but I have here you earned your bachelor's in criminal justice, master's in counseling, and doctorate in psychology. Correct. So you know what you're doing, right?
Sometimes I like to think so.
Okay. And you said, I believe you told me about 10 years ago, you got interested in focusing on death row inmates.
Yeah. So it's probably been a little longer than 10 years now that I started down this journey that has kept me going, that I never really expected to. But yes, and the reason being was teaching at the time in the field of psychology, you would get a lot of questions concerning the most debatable topics that are still in the news even today, which is gun rights, the legalization of drugs, abortion rights, and capital punishment. All of them today still very hot topics of discussion. And since I grew up hunting and I own, tons of guns, I knew enough about that area. I've been fortunate enough to travel to different countries, so I knew a lot about the drug laws, counseled females that have undergone abortions, so I knew a little bit about that, but I didn't know much about capital punishment. And I always said I would never be that type of professor that would teach through book smarts only. So I decided to haphazardly, I guess, try to get on death row in the state of Ohio at the time and asked to be put on the list or lottery or however they chose it to interview inmates and to witness an execution, which that in turn led to realizing that there were specific laws that are involved. And the Attorney General's office decided to send me the list of the inmates at that time who were scheduled for execution, the Ohio Revised Code that states who can and cannot bear witness to an execution. And they just said, if I found any loopholes, good luck. And I was fortunate enough to have a lot of educational background in that area. So that's what sent me down that rabbit hole. I only intended on going maybe one time to death row to see what it was like and to interview a couple guys. And lo and behold, here I am years and years later, and I'm still doing it.
You're still doing it now today?
Correct.
And you've relocated to Florida, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So this is a good segue. I was going to wait until later to ask you about this, but in your book, Watch Me Die, Last Words from Death Row, you mentioned Brandy Jennings. And yes. That inmate, that death row inmate, I do not know him, but I feel like I do because I live in the town where his crime was committed. It's still very much talked about, the Cracker Barrel murders. And our podcast, Paradise After Dark, actually extensively covered the Cracker Barrel murders probably I want to say 3 or 4 years ago. And it's just something that stuck in my head. I was a teenager when it happened, but it was one of those crimes that as you're growing up and it happens in your own hometown, it's like, oh my gosh, there is evil in this world. You know,
Yeah, it's amazing because everybody says the same thing. Like it happens everywhere else except your own hometown. And so Brandy and I go way back from when I first started my ventures on death rows. So I travel all over from Ohio to Florida to California, places like that on death rows. And he just happened to be one of them that had written me, and I have visited him countless times. In fact, I'll probably go up and see him again in the next couple weeks to sit down face to face like I normally do, and chat with him, get inside of his head, and see where he's at right now. We email a lot. He writes a lot. He sends me so much artwork. I probably have over 2,000 pieces of art laying around from different death row inmates, and I think in the last month, Brandy may have sent me 25 or 30 pieces alone. So
wow, that's kind of creepy.
it at first when I started this with my family, my wife and my son and daughter, they were creeped out at the very beginning. Now it's just so commonplace that they can pretty much tell whose artwork it is just by the painting style or the drawing or the canvas or whatever woodworking that they're using. So they've become pretty accustomed to it over the years.
Wow. Yeah, it would take some getting used to, I think. So, Brandy Jennings, one more question about him and death row inmates in general. Do you find them to be remorseful for the crimes that they committed, or is it kind of a mixed bag? Some are, some aren't.
It's been, I would say that 95% of them are not remorseful. Even going to the deathbed, when they walk into the death chamber and they get, placed on the gurney and strapped down, of the executions that I've witnessed, none of them have shown remorse at all. There's been times where I was the last person to speak to them. There's been times where I've had last meal with them. Never any remorse, really. There's just, when I first started this, I tried to limit my contact to only inmates who were willing to admit that they were guilty, because I thought, well, if you're on death row and you're claiming you're innocent, then you need to speak to an attorney or the Innocence Project or whomever can help. I'm just trying to get inside from a psychological standpoint their criminal thinking and their mind. And I had no problem. Everybody admitted that they were guilty at the time. So there's very few that I speak to that deny their guilt. One of them that you had mentioned earlier on before was Scott Peterson. He still maintains his innocence, and I stay in constant contact with him. But for the most part, all of them admit that they're guilty and show no remorse.
Scott Peterson, huh? That's a hot topic.
He's been in the news quite a bit lately.
Right.
And as far as I know, I think I'm about the only one outside of his family that speaks to him. And usually we communicate about every 2 weeks or so. There for a while, we were kind of cut off from communicating when he was sitting in the county jail waiting for some rulings dealing with his possible retrial and that. But he's back in San Quentin now. So, but I have quite a bit of his art, and yeah, he and I, we speak quite regularly.
Okay, and I'm sure you can't tell me if you think he's guilty or innocent, can you?
That's up to the juries to decide, I guess. And since that's in the process of being looked into, and it's in the courts right now, I would just I'm more comfortable not stating a whole lot.
Right. Okay.
Just because of the fact that it's in process right now.
Right. So, what's it like to speak at length with these awful, evil murderers? Just quick story. I had a podcast, a show I did a couple of years ago called It's Hard to Talk About. And I had guests on tell me all kinds of different stories. I mean, it wasn't just one set topic. It was somebody who had gone through something that was hard to talk about. And they would come tell me their story. And I actually had a convicted murderer. It was a drug deal gone bad, I guess. And this man killed this other man and tried to cover it up, and then eventually got caught. He spent only 7 years in prison. And I sat there and I talked to him for about 2 hours, and I recorded the whole thing. But I got to tell you, I was so disturbed by his nonchalant, just telling me the story as if he was telling me about his trip to the grocery store. I was so disturbed by it that I never released it. Honestly. So I have to ask, like, what does it take to sit there and talk to, and I'm not a squeamish person. I mean, I do true crime for a living. This is what I do. Every week it's a different case. It's horrible stuff, but I don't know, something about hearing it from the horse's mouth is different. Would you agree?
You know, and that's a great question because I get that quite a bit. And to answer that, I really don't know what it takes. It's other than you have to go into it knowing that these individuals are very sadistic, they're very evil, and they have nothing else to lose. So when I'm on death row with these guys, there's no handcuffs, there's no shackles. You know, I get to eat with them, drink with them, walk around with them, and everything like that. You know, they have let me know that the guards will let me in. You know, it's up to them to let me leave. So it's a respect kind of mutual agreement that you have. I think this is where my educational training comes in with, you know, with having a master's in counseling and doctorate in psychology, and that you're used to listening to individuals and not interrupting and not, you know, saying anything. So I just let them talk. And I have found over the years that the least amount of questions I ask them, the more they'll tell me. Of course, you know, you have to, my head is on a swivel at all times, especially on death rows, like say Florida, for example, when you might be with 25 death row inmates at once, and you're constantly looking around just to make sure, because the moment you get complacent or too comfortable, then something could very easily happen. But, you know, quite honestly, we'll sit there, we'll talk about everything from the weather to politics until they get into their case. And I think that they want to see your reaction, and I just don't give them that reaction. So then they know I'm not judging them, and then they start confessing more and more and more.
It still freaks me out to think about it.
It's different. I mean, it's, you know, I have to remind myself that while, you know, somebody like, you know, Samuel Little, who's passed away now, was known as the most prolific serial killer, killed 90 some people, thought of me as a really close personal friend because we were from the same area and knew some of the same families. And, you know, I have to remind myself, okay, he killed 90 some people, but he's never harmed anybody in my family or me. So therefore, you know, I block that out. You know, over the years, I guess I've become desensitized, which isn't probably a good thing. But when these guys, you know, for like, you know, Brandy Jennings being one of them, those are horrendous murders that took place that,
right.
you know, that they were directly involved in taking of human lives. But, you know, you sit there, you listen to them, you ask them if they want another, you know, cheeseburger or Diet Coke or whatever, and you move on and you come back around to it just to get inside of their head. So it takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of patience.
Now, why do you want to be inside their head? What do you get out of it? What do you gain from doing this?
So anybody that's ever studied, you know, psychology or anything to deal with the human mind is always curious about what makes a person tick. So one guy on death row in Ohio many, many years ago explained it to me in this way. He said that the only difference between me being on death row and you being on death row is a split-second decision. And what he meant by that is I decided to kill the people that I killed, where you have the ability to not have that lack of impulse control, which has kept you from being in my position. Stating that in a sense that most people at some point, whether it's road rage or whatever, have thought to themselves at one time or another, man, I could just kill that person. But we don't act on it. That's the abnormal psychology of it all, is when they act out on it. So that's what's always got me, I guess, intrigued by the criminal mindset of how do you progress to the point of being able to separate yourself from the normal everyday individual in society and step outside of that and take a human life, sometimes over and over and over. So that's the reason why I try to get inside of their heads to see what really makes them tick.
Do you study your subjects' crimes and them before you meet them?
So I try not to look into their crimes before I meet them. I want to get their stands first to see if it matches up, because I think we all know that the media sometimes can be a little biased or exaggerate or things like that. So I typically will meet them, let them explain themselves to me on how it happened. Then I'll go back and research it and see what it was like. But usually the first maybe few months even, I will try to learn more about their upbringing, or their family life, or what happened that brought them to death row first, just to see if there's any correlations between what we always hear about. And there's so many I don't even know how you want to refer to them, as those on social media that just because they write a lot of people, or they have visited death row once, or have spoken to one or two serial killers, they think they're experts, and it just doesn't work that way. Not that I consider myself an expert at all. That's a label that's been thrown my way, but I'll be the first one to admit that I've studied this and talked to more killers than probably most individuals out there in this field, and there's still no rhyme or reason for why they do the things that they do. I've talked to them where they've had really horrible upbringings. They were abused, they were beaten, they were sexually abused, everything else, all the way up to people that had great childhoods, families that were intact, and everything else. So some used drugs, some didn't use drugs. It's the common denominator that I have found is that they can be dangerously normal, that they can be your coworker, your classmate, your next door neighbor, and you never really know.
Yeah, I think that's one of the scariest parts of all of this, even not just death row inmates, but just bad people in general.
Right.
It's, my head's always on a swivel, just like you mentioned earlier. And just in everyday life, you know what I mean? After doing this podcast for almost 5 years now, and just reading all these horrible stories and things that happen in this world, it's crazy. So I wanted to ask you, why is it that you actually wanted to watch executions?
So the reason I wanted to do that is because of the lack of transparency that we have in this country. First of all, we're, besides us and Japan being the industrialized nations in the free world, we're the only ones that really have the death penalty. So, our neighbors to the north, Canada and Mexico to the south, all over in Europe, nobody has the death penalty, yet we still do. And they try to keep it so non-transparent that I felt that in order to learn more about it, I had to see it for myself, because they don't videotape it. They don't, show movies on it other than what, the media portrays. There's no pictures of them or anything like that. So I went, and the reason that the first book was titled Watch Me Die was because I literally had an inmate that asked me if I wanted to watch him die. And I said, yeah, sure, why not? And that's what opened up those floodgates. And then when I witnessed the first one, then other inmates reached out to me because they don't even really tell the inmates how everything goes on, the inner workings of it and what to expect. So by me witnessing it firsthand, then they wanted to talk to me, see what it was like. And then I had other invites, and I still think I have 6 or 7 more that have asked me to attend their executions when they happen as well in the future.
And do you plan to continue attending them?
You know, that's the inner struggle that I have, because at some point I have to ask myself, what am I doing it for? So I've witnessed, multiple executions when it comes to the different types of lethal injection. Brandy Jennings actually asked me to witness his, and he wants to be put to death by the electric chair.
I had heard that he requested that. I didn't know if it was true or not.
Yeah, I have that in writing. They'll send me their actual requests in writing and things like that. So, some of them want me to, retain their ashes, their bodies, whatever. So I don't, to answer you honestly, I have no idea if I'll continue down this path. We are currently in talks right now with doing a death row series. My producer, Caitlin Keating out of New York, and director Henry Roosevelt, they're in negotiations with some production companies, and it looks like it may be moving forward on a series, because I have maps to bodies as well that need to be discovered from other serial killers that they haven't been charged with these crimes yet, but I'm the only one that has the locations. So
right. I was going to ask you about that, but I didn't want to give away too much of your book. So I'm not going to say who gave you the maps, but tell me a little bit more about the maps.
So I have maps from 2 different serial killers that have killed in the state of Ohio and Florida. They're pretty detailed. They have been vetted by agents through the FBI that I sat down and had spoken with, and they agreed that they were probably legitimate. They just didn't want to offer their resources or extend any of their assistance, because unfortunately the victims were prostitutes. And if somebody else would have told me this years ago, that the FBI would not want to uncover bodies for cold cases, I would think that the person was lying, but it's actually true.
Oh, I believe you.
I was shocked.
I've been doing this long enough. I believe you.
Yeah. I mean, the politics that are involved when it comes to recovering these individuals is it's staggering. So luckily we have a really good team put together with a federal agent, one that's also retired, and one of my best friends who's a judge as well, and attorneys. So we are going to be seeing if we can uncover these individuals so we can bring some closure to some families, and we're just going to move forward from there, hopefully.
So, and you're going to be documenting this for a documentary, or is it going to be a show, or?
Yes. So okay. They are the 2 projects that are currently in negotiations right now is a series based on the death row interviews that I do, as well as the maps to recover the bodies, and then a separate documentary on all of the artwork that I have amassed over the years from death row.
But are you yourself planning on going and looking for these bodies?
Yes.
Oh, wow.
Yes. I've been to one location already when we filmed a sizzle reel for it. So yeah, it's it's different. I will say that.
Did you find a body?
Well, I can't really say that. I mean,
Okay.
I will say that when we found the one location, they stopped filming at that point. for the sizzle reel, because of course that's what you want, is to get people's attention to
Right.
pick it
Yeah.
up. So, but
Okay.
it appears that the maps will lead us to something.
Wow. Okay. That's pretty intense.
It is, and I'm not sure how I feel about that, or how I should feel about that. Again, from a psychological standpoint,
Right. So, since you are a doctor and you are qualified to diagnose, right, psychological disorders and whatnot,
Sure.
would you say that most of the people on death row are psychopaths or sociopaths?
Those terms get thrown out so much. So, there's people that even argue the difference between a sociopath and a psychopath. And, I will say that they are abnormal from the psychological perspective, that they suffer from some type of organic brain chemistry that causes them to think that the way that they do. And again, I'm speaking about the more of the serial killer aspect than the murdering aspect,
Right.
of somebody that may have killed one or two people, in the heat of passion, or whatever, during the commission of a felony that also got them placed on death row. Um, but I mean, when you're talking about dealing with people like, Dennis Rader, who's, I guess, known as BTK, and, the Samuel Littles, and the people like that, obviously there is something wrong with them mentally that causes them to disconnect from society in such a way that they can take a human life and not have any regrets. Everybody on death row, I would say, would be suffering from some type of abnormality, but what specific diagnosis that would be, it could run the spectrum.
All right. So, tell me about your book.
So the book was one that I never really knew if I was going to write about all of this or not. And then, because I'll be honest with you, I had no idea people were fascinated by death row and inmates and executions. And I literally just started looking into it, back in the day, to get educated on it. And then the next thing I know, it's just, I went down this rabbit hole, and then everybody is asking me about it. What's it like? And, all these different crime shows and documentaries on TV, and that I just never paid any attention to. So I decided to put the book out, and lo and behold, it just, the one thing that I set out to do was not offer my opinion one way or the other when it came to the death penalty. And I still feel that way to this day, that it's irrelevant what my opinion is on whether we should or should not have the death penalty. What I wanted to do was bring out the most accurate firsthand information that I could, to shed some transparency on what the capital punishment, mostly at the time in the state of Ohio, was like, what the death penalty process was like, and let people make an educated decision on their own whether or not they were for or against the death penalty. So that's what I set out to do. And since then, it's kind of mushroomed from there from Ohio to all over the country.
And you're in Florida now. So what is the system like in Florida?
So every system is different. I mean, even when I was in Ohio, I was still coming to Florida. I was still traveling to California to the different death rows. So, because I have inmates all over the country. So in Florida, the difference would be, when I go to death row here, I'm amongst, 25 different death row inmates at one time, in a room, where you can go to the canteen and, get, frozen pizzas or ice cream, or whatever you want. In Ohio, it's a little different. You're one-on-one with the inmate. You still go to vending machines and, heat up whatever you want, things like that. In San Quentin, you're locked in a cage with them one-on-one. So there's no room to get out or anything like that if anything were to happen.
Have you ever been afraid?
The only time I was ever really nervous was in Ohio's death row, when it was probably a couple of days before the person's scheduled execution, and we were walking up and down death row. We had 8 hours to spend, and we actually ordered Italian food and had it delivered to death row and everything for his last meal together. And he was, just pacing up and down with me, and he's like, "Man, Kimberlin," he's like, "I can't believe they're going to kill me in a couple of days." He's like, "If I can just kill one more person right now, they couldn't kill me, right? They'd have to try me, so they'd have to give me a stay, and it would halt it for years. Wouldn't you think that's right?" And I'm looking around, and I'm the only person, no guards or anything, and I'm like, "No, what's going to happen is, they're still going to put you to death. They're going to try in absentia. You're still going to be found guilty. It's going to bring more shame and guilt on your family," which I just pulled that out of somewhere. I don't even know where. But when I realized I was the only person around and he was talking about killing one more person, I had to come up with something real quick. So that was the only time that the hair on the back of my neck really stood up. San Quentin's a little different. That's a whole different world. They, when I went to death row there, they just told me to follow those lines and you'll find it. So I was walking all over San Quentin inside. There's like a city within a city, and until I finally found, Condemned Row, and I was thinking I was on like Candid Camera or something, because I'm ringing the buzzer to let me in on death row, and it just didn't seem right. But yeah, but for the most part, I don't really get scared, but I'm always on edge.
It would seem that you'd have to be. Like you mentioned earlier, your head on a swivel. That's come up like 3 times now.
Yeah. There's a lot of respect that they show me, but I in turn give them respect. So I've never sold anything of theirs, meaning there's people out there that pay really big money for letters and
I know.
artwork and that, and trust me, you can make a lot of money doing that. And I've never sold one single letter and one single piece of art. That's probably why I have a whole storage room filled with it all. And they respect that I'm not there to profit off of them. But and I talk to them. I'll joke with them. I mean, I've had serial killers sit in front of me, at the time, Anthony Sowell, who was known as the Cleveland Strangler. I was the first one to interview him on death row, and he liked to brag about, him being one of the prolific serial killers and how good he was. And, that you just sit there and you're like, well, listen, I don't think you're that good, because if you were, we wouldn't be having this conversation.
Yeah, you wouldn't have gotten caught.
Yeah. And when you joke with them like that, they appreciate that. So then you talk to them just like you and I are talking, and you laugh and joke, even though in the back of your mind you realize that this is a horrible human being for what they've done. But when you're sitting down across from them and you're in their house, you kind of have to give them that respect.
Well, speaking of Anthony Sowell, in your book, kind of made it sound like he was sort of the only word I can come up with is sort of a bitch.
Yeah, I think that's the wording I may have used, a whiny little bitch.
Yeah, that's
so he was as a lot of serial killers are, they like to be in control. Anthony was one that wanted to really, really be in control. And I interviewed him only because he was brand new on death row, and working with some FBI agents, they thought maybe that there were more bodies out there that he may confess to. So I agreed to ask him some questions that they devised for me, not really expecting a whole lot, because the control mechanisms that they use, they'll hang on to that information until it gets closer to the end. So he never admitted to any more to me. And then he ended up dying of cancer, I think, a year or so ago. But yeah, anytime we talked about his mom or anything like that, he'd break down and cry. And but he also wanted me to only focus on. He would get upset if I would interview anybody else on death row in Ohio, and he wanted me to write a book about him and nobody else. So yeah, that's the reason why I think I may have called him a whiny little bitch.
Well, if the shoe fits, I mean.
Yeah, right.
So if my listeners wanted to learn more about what you do and your stories, where would they find your book?
So I think it's in Barnes and Noble. It's on Amazon. It's through Wild Blue Press. So if they just search Amazon or anything like that for Watch Me Die: Last Words from Death Row, because again there's two different versions and this is the newest one. That's where they can pick up the book. I'm also on Instagram and Facebook. I haven't transitioned over to Twitter and TikTok and all those other things yet. I'm still kind of old school, but typically my Facebook and my Instagram, I will post art that comes in I try to do it on a weekly basis just to give people an idea of the different styles of art that come across on death row. From because I'll get them sent to me made out of human blood. Brandy Jennings is the one that loves to send me the ones made out of human blood. I'll tell you that. But I also have guys that will paint using semen and everything else. So
you mentioned that in your book.
You never know what to expect. Some art is just, it's amazing. It looks like gallery style art that would be hung up. Others you look at and you're like, good Lord, what am I even looking at? But I try to post different pieces of art on occasion just to show people what comes in the mail.
So your Instagram handle is walking_stick69.
Yes.
I'm actually looking at it right now.
Oh, okay.
That's where you and I connected, was on Instagram.
Yes. Yeah, correct.
And so my listeners can go follow Bill on Instagram and Facebook. Is it just Bill Kimberlin on Facebook?
Yeah. It'll show the cover of my book, Watch Me Die. And that way because some people have a lot of questions, and then they can instant message me or whatever, and I'll let them know. Sometimes they'll ask, because I don't post who the artists are for everybody to see, but sometimes people instant message me on either one, and they'll ask, hey, can I ask who this one's by or whatever? Then I'll tell them. I just don't like to glamorize or put out there, who the art is from all the time.
Okay, well, can I ask you who did Joe Exotic and the Tiger?
Yeah, that would be Jason Balcom on San Quentin's death row.
Okay, what about Betty White?
Same one. He's very good at portraits.
I see that.
Yeah.
I'm looking at them. I'm looking at them all right now. Wow. Yeah, you're right. That some of them are wonderful.
Yeah, right, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. I mean, there's just no way I could post everything that they send me. I mean, there is honestly weeks where I will get 20 and 30 paintings in 1 week. Then I might go a month and not have anything but letters. So, they'll send woodworking, they'll send, paper mache, they'll send stuff made out of, they'll make me scarves and everything else. I had the only female federal death row inmate, Lisa Montgomery, and she was executed just last year. I was actually supposed to attend that execution as well, but COVID restrictions kept me from that. And she was the first female put to death by the federal government in like 70 years. She was one that I spoke to for many years nonstop. She would send me all kinds of tapestries and things like that.
Now, Lisa Montgomery, it's kind of funny that you just mentioned that, because last week we recorded an episode about her crime.
Really?
Yes.
So yeah, Lisa and we got to know each other many years ago. She was housed in Texas at the Carswell unit, and when they put her to death, it was in Terre Haute, Indiana, which is where all federal inmates get put to death. And like I said, I was supposed to attend that one, but the federal government's a little bit different than the states. They're really strict on things, and at the time, COVID was still running rampant, and I really wasn't even sure that the execution was going to take place because of it being, the first female in 70 years. But lo and behold, they did. But she was an interesting case study just because of her mental issues as well as her medical issues. Yeah, she was just she was a different individual.
Yeah. Yeah, I think
Because again, from the psychological standpoint, the way I look at it is, here's a woman who was no doubt mentally ill, but at the same time was so calculated to be able to choose her victim at the right time, devise a scheme to go in there to purchase, I believe, a puppy that they were selling puppies, was able to subdue the woman, kill her, cut the baby out cesarean section, C-section wise, without harming the baby at all, and kidnap it and take it away and not have any training on any of that. So you have to sit there and you process all this. Okay, so how does that happen where your hands are so steady after premeditating this plot and after taking a human life? How are you able to just take a butcher knife and cut this baby out without harming it and keeping it alive? So that, to me, I found that very fascinating from the criminal thinking mind.
Yeah, you just said all that, and it's fascinating to me because I didn't even think that deep into it.
Yeah,
when we covered it, I didn't even. Oh, I got goosebumps now.
Because people think that taking the human life or something like that is bad enough, and so I look at it from a hunting perspective because I do like to hunt, and if anybody out there has ever shot a deer or a bear or an elk or whatever like that, and your adrenaline's pumping, you're excited, and then when you go to field dress it, sometimes your hands are shaking and everything else because you're just running off of adrenaline, and this animal's dead, so there's nothing to harm. But for somebody like Lisa, she had to remain so composed to be able to cut that baby out in a very short period of time for that baby to survive, and then also not harm it, and then have the ability to leave with the child and take it across state lines, kidnap it, and the baby survived.
She must have really just had absolutely no empathy, or she must have, I don't know what her mental disorders were, maybe antisocial. I'm not a doctor, but I like to guess.
Sure. Well, and with her, there was a lot of bipolar, I think, involved in things of that nature. But regardless of the mental illness, it doesn't excuse the fact that this person was still cognizant enough to plan out an entire event based on choosing the person who was pregnant and was almost at term, so the baby was fully developed, and yet she still had to kill that person and then take the baby out of that person herself without any training or anything like that. So, I mean, that's when you sit and think about the whole complexity of it all, that's where I come in and I try to decipher all of that, like what really goes through that human mind.
That's crazy when you think about it that way, which I hadn't, but now I am. It just makes it worse.
Well, it's like with, Brandy and them in Florida, where you go into Cracker Barrel and you slit the throats of three individuals, I believe, and you rob the place and you take off. And, I think they ended up catching them out of Las Vegas in Nevada, and they had a shootout there. And, so they were able to still gain their composure to leave town and do all of that, premeditated wise. So
Yeah.
it goes way beyond just the taking of a human life. It's everything leading up to it and everything that goes on afterwards. That's what I look at and just try to figure it out. And it's difficult.
Yeah, it is. Do some of these things haunt you? I mean, do you get nightmares ever, or?
No, not. See, I don't know if that's good or bad either. No, not really. I mean, when one of them gets executed, that I hate to say it, but it's a subject that file's closed. I set it aside. I move on. But I think also that since I'm still so involved in it, that I haven't had time to really, sit down and reflect on it without doing it in a working capacity. So, I'm certain that there's going to come a point in time where I start questioning myself, especially when, people out there are looking for the gory details and the entertainment aspect of it all. And you're really dealing in human lives. So, even when it comes to an execution, it's not like you're going to see somebody in hospice that is suffering and, you just want them to pass so they're no longer suffering. These individuals are, wide awake, laughing and joking with you, and then, hours later are dead. So, I'm certain there'll come a point in time where I have to sit down and reflect on all this myself.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think I've asked all the questions that I wanted to ask. Is there anything else that you want to talk about?
Yeah, I'm an open book, so I will talk about anything you want. It's just, it's great being on your show. It's an honor too. So, I just want to thank you for having me on.
I'm sure I'll have more questions, but you know what I'll do? I'll just message you on Instagram, and
Absolutely.
then I'll update our listeners.
Great. And as we move forward with hopefully with the series and documentary, and that I'll keep you apprised of all of that, and we can maybe talk about that later on. And
I would love to. I would love to observe. Like, can I come just watch you guys film it?
It's I'm trying to figure out where we're going to start filming first. I think we'll probably go back to Ohio and start filming, I believe, and then work our way back down here to. This is my hopes, anyways, because Florida is hot in the summertime, and I don't want to be traipsing through anywhere looking for a body in August down here.
Right. I don't blame you.
Yeah. So, I'm scheduled to, I think, hopefully go out and see Charles Ng pretty soon out in California. He's another.
Gosh.
I speak to him on a regular basis, and he's been asking me to come out there and interview him. So I'm hoping to get some more information from him as well. I also have the only female Native American on death row, Sherry Rhodes. She's out in Chowchilla, so I'll probably be heading out that way and interviewing her to get more insight on the 5 people that she killed. I think Charles may have killed with Leonard Lake maybe 25 or something like that. So,
yeah. They were scary.
Very, very. And Leonard Lake killed himself during interrogation, where Charles Ng was captured up in Canada and then brought back, extradited back. And, he former Marine as well. And so I've always been interested in his upbringing and seeing where he leads me, because I don't believe all the bodies were recovered from their victims as well. So that's what I'm hoping to accomplish by continuing my interviews with him as well. The last couple of years with COVID has restricted my access to a lot of them in prison,
Right.
because there's so much more they'll tell you face to face than in letter form or phone calls or Skype or emails. Because again, it's nothing to get 4 or 5 phone calls from death row. I get tons of emails, everything. So they have a lot of access, and but all of those can be intercepted, or too many eyes and ears. So they'd rather tell you in person.
Now, do you have any kind of obligation? Like if they were to admit to more crimes to you, is that under doctor-patient confidentiality, or are you supposed to report it?
So there's no duty to report. There's also no confidentiality that I have to adhere by, because I'm not seeing them as patients. I'm not, seeing them as a therapist or counselor or psychologist or anything like that. I'm just researching them as any other individual would. I just happen to have the background and the science behind me. So it's not that I'm obligated to, but when, you get the maps and things like that, you obviously want law enforcement involved, which is why I've reached out, to the federal agencies when I did receive the maps, and the ones that I'm still receiving, just to make sure that all the bases are covered. And I'm assuming that, if and when the time comes and we discover, the remains of somebody, then that's when it'll be hands off for me, and then, law enforcement will take over.
Okay. And I'm still looking through your Instagram. I see Brandy Jennings sent you some face masks.
Lots of face masks. Yeah.
Nice of him.
Yeah, you never know what to expect when Brandy sends you stuff. So
he's been like a nightmare of mine for years, and it's just so funny to hear you talk about him like he's your buddy.
Well, he's a big guy. I will say that. He's probably about 6'6",
and he's scary looking. His face.
Yeah, he's got some anger issues, so he's not afraid to express his anger towards a lot of others in death row. So, lucky for me, I get along with him very well.
Well, tell him that there's a girl in Florida still scared of him. No, don't tell him that.
that means he'll just want to meet you.
No.
It's I'm taking my producer Caitlin Keating with me. I think the next time I go, and she's a little nervous herself, I think, because of the lack of security and shackles and chains and things like that. So it's definitely not for the faint at heart. It's a different subculture and a different society inside death row.
I just don't know if I could do it. I mean, I just don't know if I'm mentally strong enough to do it. I mean, not that there's anything wrong with doing it. It's just, I don't think I'm mentally there.
Well, and nor should a lot of people try that. That's the thing. I think that's the one thing that kind of bothers me, is that people want to reach out to these individuals and try to talk to them and develop that type of personal relationship with them. And I'll be honest with you, I have no personal relationship with any of them. I still see them as subjects. They, on the other hand, see me as close personal friends or whatever, and I allow them to, for various reasons, because they'll share more information, or they keeps me safe on death row. But they know everything about me before I even see them, and I don't think others understand that. So when they ask me personal questions, family wise or location wise, that that's where the trust has to come in, and the respect, because I answer them honestly, because 9 times out of 10 they already know the answer. They just want to see if I'm being truthful. They know where I live, they know where my kids went to school, they know where my wife worked, they know everything. And they'll remind you of that from time to time. So stuff will show up, even though I have a post office box, stuff will show up at our doorstep. or like, my son's mascot at his school or my daughter's favorite singer, stuff that I've never told them about. And they'll do artwork, that matches up with that stuff. And just to let you know, there are little subtle hints of, we also know about you as well.
Oh, that's creepy. That is very creepy.
Yeah.
So can you tell me, who are some of the most high profile people that you've talked to?
I would say the people like Scott Peterson or Dennis Rader, BTK, and Samuel Little, Charles Ng, Anthony Sowell, Jablonski. I think Glenn Rogers was down here. I think he's in Florida's death row as well. Man, they all run together after a while, because I was never the one to. I think I just got a letter a couple months ago from Gary Ridgway, and
well, he's still alive.
He's still alive, yeah. So, they all blend together after a while, because I've spoken to so many of them over the years. But and again, I've never sold them out or sold anything of theirs. So I think that's the reason why they still reach out to me, people, and they'll get my name from other inmates and address. So it's not like I reach out to them. They find me.
So you haven't sought any out in particular that you wanted to talk to?
Not for years. I mean, I didn't even seek out Scott Peterson. Somebody on San Quentin's death row, he must have asked about me, and they gave him my name and address, and he had written me. And same with Gary Ridgway. Gary Ridgway's not even on death row, and he reached out to me. So
are you going to talk to him?
Yeah, I think I would like to sit down face to face with him to see, if there are more victims out there, just to get inside of his head, see what he's thinking. But, I'll leave that up to him. If he extends that invitation to me, I'll probably do that. But yeah, it's funny. I'll get letters all the time from people that I've never heard of, where they've said they've got, they've heard I'm a stand-up guy on death row, and they're reaching out to me. So, sometimes I have a lot of letters I haven't even opened up yet.
So here's a big question. Have you spoken to Tommy Ziegler?
On Florida's death row?
Yes.
Yes.
What's your take on that? Now, we haven't even covered that yet. That's something that's going to take me a lot of time. But that's something that will be covered on our show. Okay, so
you'll have to forgive me, but refresh my memory. Is he the one that's been on death row the longest?
Yes.
Yes. So he's got a lot of respect on death row. He reached out to me a couple years ago, and I've seen him in person a number of times when I go to death row. And I'll be honest, from everything that I've heard from inmates all throughout death row, is that he should not be there.
Yeah, I agree. I think that there's plenty of, I don't want to give it away, but they've even done, I believe, DNA proving his innocence, and he's still there. And he's had 28 exonerations, the most in the entire country.
Right.
And yeah.
And that's really sad, because, when you're talking about the ultimate form of punishment,
right,
in my opinion, you better be damn well sure that that person is guilty. And if there's any question whatsoever, then that punishment should not be carried out. It's that simple in my mind. But the lengths that the states will go to keep an individual alive long enough to kill them medically, and then also legally to keep them from winning an appeal, it makes you really question our legal system. And with Tommy there, yeah, he like I said, from what I know about the case, from what he's told me, from what other inmates have told me over the years, he should not be there, and has the nicest attitude about it all. And,
yeah, I've heard that.
And has never had a single write-up that I know of, and prison on death row or anything like that.
See, and we could do a whole nother show on the justice system, and I have a lot to say on that subject, but
Right.
I digress.
I hear you.
All right, Bill. Well, our listeners can find your book at Barnes & Noble, on Amazon, and I can tell you that you can find it also on Audible, because that's how I listened. I listened to it.
Nice.
Because I was on a road trip, and it was a 6-hour road trip, and I think it's like 3.5 hours on Audible. So it took up a good chunk of my my drive. Pretty interesting. Definitely worth a read or a listen. And thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me and educating me on death row and what it's like. Definitely different. Definitely something different.
I appreciate the opportunity of being on your show. And like I said, anytime you have any questions, reach out to me. Or if you ever want me back on, I'd be more than happy to.
Okay. Yeah, definitely. When you start your filming for your series or your documentary, I would definitely like to have you back on to talk about that.
Sounds great.
Again, if you'd like to support the show, please consider subscribing to our Patreon.
Yeah, it's patreon.com/Tomahawk Media. And be sure to also check out our website for links to our social media, our merch store, and anything else that happens to say Paradise After Dark. We'll be happy to, take you on.
Please make sure to subscribe to the show on whatever platform you're listening on and rate and review. This really helps us branch out and reach a wider audience.
It really does go a long way to help out the show. So nothing else, just give it a quick little 5-star rating. That's fine. And as always, everyone, thank you very much for listening
to Paradise After Dark.
Dark, 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 dark.